Sometimes the cruelest wounds come not from enemies, but from those who should see our worth. There's nothing more heartbreaking than watching someone you love be rejected simply for being different. In ancient Norway, Sigrun was born blind and weak in a world that valued only strength and beauty. Every man who came to court her walked away in disgust. Her giant brother Tormund had endured enough. When the last suitor laughed at his sister, Tormund stood up and made a promise that would change everything. He declared he would be her protector for life, her shield against a cruel world. But would even a brother's fierce love be enough to heal her broken heart? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the fjords of Jotunfell like the breath of sleeping giants, and in the great hall of Jarl Bjorn's stronghold, his daughter Sigrun sat by the hearth, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns carved into Herja's silver arm ring. The ancient piece had belonged to her grandmother, a woman of legendary strength who had once stood beside kings and spoken prophecy. Now it rested on Sigrun's thin wrist, a reminder of the noble blood that flowed through veins too fragile for this harsh world. "The merchants from the eastern settlements have arrived," announced Astrid, the head serving woman, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of one who had learned to speak carefully around the Jarl's afflicted daughter. "They bring word of good harvests and tales of warriors seeking brides." Sigrun nodded without lifting her head from her weaving. Her fingers moved with practiced precision across the loom, creating patterns she could not see but felt in the rhythm of the threads. Each morning brought the same routine: wake before dawn, dress in the finest clothes her station demanded, sit in the great hall where visitors might glimpse the Jarl's daughter, and pretend not to hear the whispered conversations that always ended the same way. "Too bad about the girl," they would say. "Such noble breeding, but what man wants a wife who cannot see his face or bear strong children?" Her brother Tormund entered the hall with the heavy footsteps of a man who stood taller than most doorframes. At 28, he had earned the name Oxborn, not merely for his enormous size, but for the gentle strength with which he carried himself, powerful enough to lift a horse, careful enough to handle a butterfly. His presence changed the atmosphere of any room, partly from his physical dominance, but mostly from the warmth that seemed to radiate from his being. "Sister," he said, settling beside her with surprising grace for one so large. "The traders speak of a fair in Stavanger next month. They say bards from across the northern lands will gather to share songs and stories." Sigrun's fingers paused in their weaving. Music had always been her sanctuary, the one realm where her blindness became irrelevant. She possessed a voice that could make grown warriors weep, and a memory that held every saga, every song, every poem she had ever heard. In the darkness behind her eyes, she could see entire worlds painted in melody and verse. "Perhaps we might journey there," Tormund continued, his voice carrying that particular gentleness he reserved for moments when he sensed her spirits flagging. "You could share your songs with those who would truly appreciate them. And what would they see when I stood before them?" Sigrun asked, her voice steady but soft. A blind girl stumbling through verses, dependent on others to guide her to the stage. Tormund was quiet for a long moment, and she could feel the weight of his gaze upon her. Her brother saw her more clearly than anyone, not as the burden their parents worried over, not as the failed marriage prospect the community whispered about, but as the remarkable woman she had become despite everything arrayed against her. "They would see what I see," he said finally. "A woman whose voice carries the wisdom of the old gods, whose memory holds the stories that bind our people together, whose spirit burns brighter than any forge fire." Their father, Jarl Bjorn, emerged from his private chambers with the measured stride of a man accustomed to command. His beard had gone silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes spoke of years spent weighing difficult decisions. He loved his daughter deeply, but love could not change the practical realities of their world. A noble house needed alliances, and alliances came through marriage. Sigrun's disability made her a liability in the careful game of political maneuvering that kept their clans strong. "The delegation from Hedmark arrives tomorrow," he announced, addressing the room but clearly speaking to Sigrun. "Their eldest son Ragnar seeks a wife. His father and I have discussed terms." Sigrun's hands stilled completely now. Another suitor, another hopeful negotiation, another inevitable disappointment. She had endured this ritual 17 times in the past 3 years, each rejection cutting deeper than the last. Not because she desperately wanted marriage, though she did long for companionship and purpose, but because each no reinforced what she feared most about herself. "Father," Tormund's voice carried a warning note. "Perhaps we should consider—" "The matter is decided," Bjorn interrupted, though not unkindly. "Ragnar comes with an open mind and strong dowry. Perhaps this time will be different." But Sigrun knew it would not be different. It was never different. The pattern had become as familiar as her morning prayers. The suitor would arrive with cautious optimism, would be introduced to the Jarl's daughter, would spend a polite but brief time in conversation, and would find reasons to withdraw his suit before the sun set. Sometimes they were cruel about it, sometimes merely awkward, but the result was always the same. Her mother, Lady Ragnhild, entered from the kitchens, where she had been overseeing preparations for the evening meal. Unlike her husband, she had never quite learned to mask her worries about Sigrun's future. Love and fear warred constantly in her expressions, creating a tension that made conversations difficult. "Perhaps you might practice your songs for tomorrow's feast," she suggested to Sigrun. "Music has always been your gift. And Ragnar is said to appreciate the old ways." "Yes, mother," Sigrun replied, though inwardly she wondered what good her songs would do if the man could not bear to look upon her face while she sang them. As afternoon stretched toward evening, the household bustled with preparations for the next day's arrival. Tormund found reasons to linger near his sister, offering small conversations and gentle companionship that she had come to depend upon. He was her anchor in a world that often seemed determined to remind her of everything she could not be. "Tell me about your day," she said as they walked together in the garden behind the great hall. Her hand rested lightly on his massive forearm, and her steps matched his shortened stride with practiced ease. "What news from the training grounds?" "Young Eric finally mastered the shield wall formation," Tormund replied, guiding her around a loose stone in the path. "And Gunnar challenged me to single combat again. And I declined, as always. There's no honor in defeating a man half my size, and no lesson in humiliating someone in front of his peers." This was the contradiction of her brother that never ceased to amaze her. Men feared him for his size and strength, yet he possessed the most gentle soul she had ever known. Warriors sought to test themselves against him, but he preferred to teach rather than dominate. He could have claimed leadership of their father's guard, could have demanded recognition as the finest warrior in 3 territories. But instead, he chose to remain simply Tormund, protector of those who needed protection. Friend to those who valued friendship over fear. "Sometimes I think you were meant for a different age," Sigrun mused. "A time when strength meant more than the ability to break things." "Perhaps," he agreed. "But I was born into this age, in this place, with this family. I cannot imagine wanting to be anywhere else." They paused beside the small shrine their grandmother had built to honor Frigg, the goddess of marriage and family. Herja had been a woman of deep faith and deeper wisdom, and she had left instructions that this shrine should never be neglected. Sigrun knelt and placed fresh flowers at the goddess's feet, as she did every evening. "Grandmother," she whispered, too quietly for even Tormund to hear, "show me the path forward. Help me understand why I was made this way, what purpose you intended for me." The wind stirred the flowers at her feet, carrying the scent of coming autumn and the distant sound of waves against stone. For just a moment, she felt a presence, warm, knowing, patient. Her grandmother had often told her that the gods spoke not in thunder and lightning, but in subtle signs that only the wise could interpret. Perhaps the answer would come, but not yet, not until she was ready to understand it. As they returned to the hall, Sigrun reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. Born into nobility but marked by disability, blessed with rare gifts but cursed with social rejection, loved deeply by family but isolated from the world beyond these walls. Tomorrow would bring another suitor, another test, another opportunity for disappointment. But tonight, walking beside her brother under the vast northern sky, she felt a flicker of something she had not experienced in months. Not hope exactly, but a sense that the story was not yet finished. That forces beyond her understanding were still at work, shaping her destiny. The silver arm ring caught the last light of evening, and for a moment she could almost feel her grandmother's presence in the ancient metal, patient, enduring, waiting for the right moment to reveal the strength that had always been there. Hidden beneath the surface, like silver waiting to be drawn from ore, the great hall of Jotunfell had been transformed for the bridal moot, its stone walls draped with the finest tapestries and the long tables laden with the abundance of late harvest. Torches cast dancing shadows across the assembled guests, creating an atmosphere of festive anticipation that felt hollow to Sigrun as she sat in her place of honor beside her father's chair. The mockery cup, an ornate drinking horn carved with scenes of ancient victories, rested on the high table, waiting to be raised in celebration of whatever match might be made this day. Ragnar of Hedmark had arrived that morning with a retinue befitting his status as heir to rich farmlands and a respected name. He was handsome in the way that northern men were expected to be, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident bearing that came from never having faced serious hardship. His hair was the color of wheat, his beard neatly trimmed, and his clothes spoke of wealth without ostentation. Sigrun had felt his eyes upon her during the formal introductions, had heard the subtle shift in his voice when her disability became apparent. It was always the same. Initial politeness giving way to barely concealed disappointment, then a gradual retreat into the safety of conventional courtesies. She had learned to read the signs in the spaces between words, in the length of pauses, in the careful neutrality of tone that meant a man was already planning his graceful exit. "Tell us of your lands." "Your Ragnar," Jarl Bjorn requested, raising his own cup in welcome. "I hear the harvests in Hedmark have been particularly blessed this year." "Indeed, my lord," Ragnar replied, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "The gods have smiled upon our efforts. Our grain stores are full, our livestock thriving. A man could ask for no better foundation upon which to build a household." The conversation flowed around Sigrun like water around a stone. She contributed when spoken to directly, demonstrating the education and refinement expected of a Jarl's daughter, but she could feel the growing distance in Ragnar's responses. He was courteous, even kind, but his attention increasingly wandered to other parts of the hall. Other conversations, other possibilities. Tormund sat at the warrior's table, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid seeming overprotective. His presence was a comfort to Sigrun, though she knew it also served as a reminder to potential suitors that any insult to her would not go unanswered. Her brother's reputation as a gentle giant had not diminished his fearsome capabilities in combat, and wise men treated his sister with respect, regardless of their private feelings. As the evening progressed, the subtle signs became unmistakable. Ragnar's responses grew shorter, his posture more distant, his smiles more forced. When Lady Ragnhild suggested that Sigrun might honor the gathering with a song, the young man's enthusiasm was so obviously manufactured that even the most charitable observer would have noticed. "I would be honored to hear your daughter's voice," he said. The words technically correct but empty of genuine interest. Sigrun rose gracefully, allowing Astrid to guide her to the center of the hall where a simple stool had been placed for her use. The conversations quieted as she settled herself, her hands folded in her lap, her face serene despite the churning emotions within her chest. She had chosen an ancient ballad about star-crossed lovers, partly because it was beautiful, partly because its theme seemed appropriate to her situation. Her voice rose clear and true, filling the hall with melody that seemed to make the very stones listen. The song told of a maiden cursed by the gods and a warrior who loved her despite the world's condemnation, of loyalty tested by hardship and love that transcended mortal limitations. As she sang, she felt the familiar transformation that music always brought, the sense that her blindness became irrelevant, that her weakness fell away, that she became purely herself in the truest sense. When the final notes faded into silence, the hall erupted in genuine appreciation. Warriors who had seen battle across the known world wiped moisture from their eyes, and serving women paused in their duties to nod approval. But when Sigrun turned toward where Ragnar sat, the silence from that direction told her everything she needed to know. "Beautifully done," he said when custom demanded some response. "You have been well taught." The words were correct, but they carried no warmth, no genuine appreciation for what she had just shared. Worse, they reduced her gift to mere instruction, as if any woman could be taught to sing as she did. The dismissal was subtle but complete, and Sigrun felt something crack inside her chest. Near midnight, Ragnar made his move. In the rowdy celebration, he leaned close to Jarl Bjorn, with drunken confidence. "She is lovely, truly, and talented," he began, words slurred with ale. "But you must understand my position. My family has expectations. A wife must manage households, bear strong children, represent the family with dignity." Sigrun heard every word, though Ragnar believed her too distant to eavesdrop. His casual assessment struck her like a blow. "Perhaps she might suit a religious life," he continued. "The gods often call such unfortunates to service. She could serve without the burden of expectations she cannot fulfill." Tormund's cup stopped halfway to his lips. He could see his sister's face, composed but pale as winter ice. The big man rose with deliberate care. Ragnar reached for the ornate drinking horn, raising it with broad gesture. To unfortunate daughters and families, wise enough to know their limitations, the cup never reached his lips. Tormund crossed the hall in 3 strides, moving with avalanche grace. His shadow fell across the table like a thundercloud. "Put down the cup. Friend Tormund, surely you see. Put down the cup." The hall went silent. Ragnar set down the horn with shaking hands. "You speak of my sister as if she were broken, rather than a woman of worth. You enjoy our hospitality, then insult the finest soul in this hall with ignorant assumptions." Tormund turned to Sigrun, offering his hand. When she took it, he helped her stand with infinite gentleness. "If no man sees her worth, then she will have none lesser than me to honor her for life." The declaration fell like stones into deep water. "I swear before these witnesses that she will never again endure such disrespect. She will have in me a champion who sees her true value." He addressed Ragnar with devastating courtesy. "You're welcome to finish your drink. I suggest you leave at first light." Standing beside her brother, Sigrun felt something she hadn't experienced in years: recognition. Someone had seen her worth and declared it without reservation. "Thank you," she whispered. "Let the feast continue," Tormund said. Though everyone knew nothing would be the same, the mockery cup sat abandoned, reminder of how quickly words spoken in ignorance could become catalyst for transformation. Neither sibling understood the full implications yet, only that a line had been crossed and their world changed forever. Dawn came grey and cold to Jotunfell, matching the subdued mood that had settled over the stronghold like morning mist. Ragnar and his retinue had departed before the sun cleared the eastern mountains, their horses' hooves echoing hollowly on the stone courtyard as they rode toward the mountain pass. The speed of their departure spoke louder than any formal farewell. Another suitor fled, another bridge burned, another reminder that the world beyond these walls found Sigrun lacking. Tormund stood in the armory, methodically cleaning his war axe with the deliberate motions of a man seeking focus through familiar ritual. The weapon had served him well in countless battles, its steel blade unmarked by rust, its oak handle worn smooth by his massive hands. But this morning, as he worked oil into the metal, he found himself thinking of it differently. No longer simply Tormund's axe, or even the Oxborn's blade. From this day forward, it would be known as Sister's Shield, a reminder of the vow he had sworn before the assembled hall. The weight of that declaration pressed upon him like winter snowfall, gradual but inexorable. In the clear light of morning, away from the righteous anger that had driven his words, he could see the complexity of what he had committed himself to. He had promised to be Sigrun's champion, her protector against a world that measured worth in the wrong ways. But what did such protection truly mean? How did one shield another from the casual cruelties of society without becoming a prison warden? Brother? Sigrun's voice came from the doorway, tentative in a way that cut him more deeply than any blade ever had. In that single word, he heard all her uncertainty, a fear that perhaps his dramatic gesture had been motivated by pity rather than genuine conviction. "Come in," he said, setting aside his work and turning to face her. "The morning is cold, but the forge fire is warm." She entered slowly, her hand trailing along the familiar stone wall until she reached the wooden stool where she often sat during his weapon maintenance. The routine was comforting to both of them. These quiet moments when conversation came easily and the outside world seemed distant and manageable. "The servants whisper," she said without preamble. "They say I have ruined your chances for marriage, that no woman will want a man who has bound himself to his sister's service." Tormund's hand stilled on the axe handle. He had expected many consequences from his declaration, but he had not considered how quickly the gossip would reach Sigrun's ears, or how deeply it would wound her to think she had become an obstacle to his happiness. "And what do you think of these whispers?" he asked carefully. "I think," she said with a slight tremor in her voice, "that they may not be wrong. I think that in trying to protect me from one kind of pain, you may have purchased another kind of suffering for us both." The honesty of her response struck him with unexpected force. His sister had always possessed an uncommon ability to see through to the heart of matters, to perceive truths that others missed or preferred to ignore. It was one of the qualities he most admired in her, and one of the reasons her blindness seemed such a cruel irony. She saw more clearly than most people who possessed perfect sight. "Tell me something," he said, moving to sit on a larger stool facing her. "When you were singing last night, before Ragnar showed his true nature, what did you feel?" Sigrun considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I felt alive," she said finally. "I felt like myself, not the Jarl's afflicted daughter, not the burden that no man wants, just Sigrun. When I sing, I am not limited by what I cannot see or do. I'm only what I can give to the world, and do you think that feeling depends on having a husband to validate it?" "No," she admitted, "but it might depend on having a place in the world where such gifts matter, where they are welcomed and valued, rather than merely tolerated." Tormund nodded, though she could not see the gesture. "Then we are in agreement. What I swore last night was not to keep you locked away in safety, but to ensure that you have the chance to find that place, to discover what the world truly has to offer someone with your remarkable spirit." Their father arrived with heavy footsteps, looking as though he had slept poorly. "We need to talk. Both of you." They followed him to his private chamber, the heart of their family's power. Maps covered one wall, weapons filled alcoves. But it was the simple wooden table that drew attention. Upon it lay scrolls, sealed with neighboring Jarl's marks. "Word of last night has traveled faster than Ragnar's horses," Bjorn began. "I have received 3 messages, each asking for clarification. And what have you told them, father?" Tormund asked. "The truth. That my son made a vow to protect his sister's honor, and any man who wishes to court her must prove himself worthy." The words were diplomatic, but carried implicit challenge. Bjorn was making it official policy rather than emotional outburst. "However, we must face practical consequences. Your declaration removed Sigrun from normal marriage negotiation. No Jarl will send sons to court a woman whose brother has sworn to judge worthiness." "Good," Tormund said firmly. "If they're not prepared to meet such standards, they were never worthy, perhaps. But this means political alliances I hope to secure through her marriage are no longer possible." The weight of implications settled over them. Sigrun's marriage had been diplomacy, a way of binding families through blood. By making himself her protector, Tormund had removed that tool. "I understand the cost," Sigran said quietly. "I release you from obligation to honor Tormund's declaration." "No!" The word came from both men simultaneously. "That path is closed," Bjorn said gently, "perhaps for the best. Your brother has shown different ways to value a daughter. We will adapt." Tormund felt gratitude toward his father, recognizing the courage to abandon long-held plans for uncertain alternatives. "What would you have us do?" "Learn to live with your choice. Tormund, your vow means nothing if you cannot help Sigrun find her path to fulfillment. Sigrun, your acceptance means nothing if you use it to withdraw rather than engage more fully." Lady Ragnhild appeared, her face drawn with sleepless worry. "The household is in upheaval. Half the servants think Tormund is the most noble brother who ever lived. The other half think he has doomed our family. The kitchen maids are taking sides." Despite the gravity, Tormund smiled at his mother's practical concerns. "Then we must give them something else to talk about. Something that shows we're moving forward rather than merely reacting." "Such as?" Bjorn asked. Tormund looked at his sister, seeing hope and apprehension in her face. The path ahead was unclear, but it was theirs to choose, such as helping Sigrun discover what she truly wants from life, now that she is free to want it. 3 weeks after Ragnar's humiliating departure, the rhythm of life at Jotunfell had begun to settle into new patterns. The household gossip had gradually shifted from scandalous speculation to grudging acceptance, helped in no small part by Sigrun's increasing confidence and Tormund's unwavering dedication to his self-appointed role as protector champion. Each morning found the siblings in the garden behind the great hall, where Sigrun had claimed a particular boulder as her own, a smooth granite stone worn by centuries of wind and weather into the perfect seat for contemplation. She called it her singing stone, and it had become the place where she practiced her voice, tested new songs, and worked through the complex emotions that came with her newfound freedom from the marriage market. "The melody wants to climb higher," she murmured to herself, her fingers moving across invisible harp strings as she worked through a particularly challenging passage. "But the words pull it back to earth." Tormund sat nearby on a fallen log, ostensibly sharpening his sax, but actually serving as her audience and occasional critic. He had discovered an unexpected gift for recognizing when her musical experiments succeeded and when they fell short, though he could never articulate why certain combinations of notes and words worked better than others. "Perhaps the words are meant to anchor it," he suggested. "Like a ship needs weight in its hold to sail straight." Sigrun paused, considering this perspective. Her brother possessed an intuitive understanding of balance and proportion that served him well in combat and apparently in musical critique. "Say that again, but differently." "The melody soars because it has something solid to return to. Without the weight of meaning in the words, it would just float away and be forgotten," she smiled. The first truly unguarded expression of happiness he had seen from her since the night of her public humiliation. "Yes, exactly that." She began the song again, but this time she leaned into the earthbound quality of the lyrics, using them as a foundation rather than fighting against their pull. The result was remarkable, a piece that seemed to capture both the longing for transcendence and the necessity of remaining connected to the human experience. It was, Tormund realized, very much like his sister herself, anchored by disability but not limited by it, grounded in reality but capable of touching something beyond the ordinary. Approaching horses interrupted their practice, 5 travel-worn but well-equipped men with the lean look of those who spent more time riding than in halls. Their leader was perhaps 40 years, grey-bearded and sharp-eyed, dismounting with fluid grace. But what caught Tormund's attention was how they paused when Sigrun's voice reached them, shifting from casual alertness to focused attention. "That is a sound worth travelling far to hear," the leader called, his eastern accent clear. "We have ridden 3 days, following rumours of a singer whose voice could make stones weep, and the tales were understated." Sigrun's song faltered, confidence evaporating under unexpected scrutiny. She stood quickly reaching for Tormund's arm, but he remained seated, sensing this moment required careful handling. "I am Erik Thorson, and these are my companions. We seek tales worth preserving, songs worth learning, voices worth remembering. Might we approach?" The request was courteous, but Tormund saw tension in his sister's shoulders. The attention she craved and feared had found her place of safety. "This is my sister, Sigrun," Tormund said, rising to full height while keeping his voice welcoming. "And I am Tormund, son of Jarl Bjorn. You are welcome, but approach slowly. My sister is not accustomed to strangers." His protective stance made clear that respect was required or they would deal with him. Erik's companions arranged themselves non-threateningly, while their leader approached with visible, empty hands. "Lady Sigrun, your voice carries wisdom of old songs and freshness of new inspiration. It would be an honor to hear more if you would share." Something in his tone, genuine appreciation without pity, reached past Sigrun's barriers. She straightened, finding dignity in sincere praise. "What brings you so far seeking songs?" "The world grows smaller each year," Erik replied, settling cross-legged on grass. "Old ways, stories, songs fade when not preserved. We are collectors and teachers, carrying the best from settlement to settlement." His words sparked hunger in Sigrun's expression, validation, that her gift mattered beyond family. "Entertainment, the song you interrupted, is one I've been working on myself. It tells of a woman who dreams of flight, but finds strength in the earth beneath her feet. The eternal tension between aspiration and foundation. Sing it for us." I suspect it was worth the 3 days' ride. What followed was perhaps Sigrun's finest performance. Buoyed by an audience that understood craft as well as appreciated result, she sang with confidence that transformed the garden gathering into something approaching magic. When the final notes faded, profound stillness followed genuine movement. "That is why we travel," Erik said finally. The conversation ranged across topics Sigrun had never discussed outside family. Composition techniques, preserving traditional forms while allowing innovation. The responsibility of gifts that could move hearts. For the first time, she found herself among people who saw her blindness as incidental, who valued her thoughts on subjects that mattered, who treated her as peer rather than curiosity. Tormund watched the transformation with pride and concern. This was what he had hoped for, chance for his sister to discover her worth. But he saw the danger too, how hunger for recognition might make her vulnerable to exploitation. As sun descended, Erik approached Tormund privately. "Your sister possesses rare gift. Not just the voice, but deeper understanding of what songs can do, preserve and transmit what matters most to a people." "She does," Tormund agreed. "There are others like us scattered across northern lands. Some gather for festivals, sharing discoveries, finding new talents. Your sister would be celebrated for what she contributes, rather than dismissed for what she cannot do." The suggestion hung between them like an offered gift that might prove blessing or curse. Tormund saw the appeal, a world where Sigrun's gifts would be valued. He also saw risks, strangers who might not understand her vulnerabilities, situations she couldn't navigate safely alone. "It is something to consider," he said carefully. "If you venture beyond these hills, seek the autumn gathering at Kaupang. Ask for the circle of voices. They would welcome both of you enthusiastically." After the travelers departed, Sigrun remained on her singing stone, face turned toward the setting sun. "They saw me," she said softly. "They did. The question is, what do you want to do with that recognition?" For the first time since Ragnar's insult, Sigrun smiled with genuine anticipation. The world had grown larger, full of potential she was beginning to understand. She was no longer afraid of that vastness. She had found her voice and was ready to discover where it might lead. The autumn winds brought more than winter's promise. They carried news, rumors, and subtle pressures that could reshape clan power balances. 6 weeks after Erik Thorson's visit, Sigrun had thrown herself into music with renewed purpose. But the wider world had not forgotten Jotunfell's unusual arrangement. On a wind-torn morning, The wayfarer's map came into their possession through a travel-stained messenger seeking shelter. His horse was lame, supplies exhausted. Following northern hospitality tradition, Jarl Bjorn welcomed him and offered food and rest. The man was grateful but reticent about his origins, speaking only of urgent eastern business. What caught Tormund's attention was how the messenger's eyes lingered on Sigrun during evening meal, studying her with calculating intensity. Only after the messenger departed at dawn, leaving behind a worn leather scroll he claimed worthless, did they discover what he had truly carried. The map revealed northern routes and settlements, but more importantly, contained marginal notes in different hands, observations about local customs, politics, and notably mentions of gifted individuals worth seeking. "Look here," Sigran said, fingers tracing raised ink as Tormund described the markings. "This note beside Headmark's mark, 'Daughter refuses all suitors, protected by giant brother.' We are becoming legend." The realization was thrilling and troubling. Word was spreading beyond immediate neighbors, creating reputation that might attract unwanted attention. But it also suggested Sigrun's gifts were becoming known in distant circles, potentially opening unconsidered doors. Tormund was studying these implications when his father summoned them for consequential conversation. Bjorn looked older that morning, leadership's weight etched deeply around his eyes. "We have received delegation request from Jarl Magnus of Nordfjord," he began. "He wishes to discuss potential alliance, but his terms are specific. He wants to meet both of you personally." The significance was immediately apparent. Nordfjord was the most powerful northern settlement, Magnus known as shrewd politician, who rarely acted without multiple motives. For him to specifically request Sigrun's presence at diplomatic meeting was unprecedented. "What does he want?" Tormund asked. "Officially, trade agreements and mutual defense pacts," Bjorn replied. "Unofficially, sources suggest he has heard tales of Sigrun's gifts and wishes to evaluate them himself. Magnus has always collected unusual talents, warriors, craftsmen, scholars. It seems he has developed interest in adding gifted singer to his household." The words hung like a challenge. Here was expected political pressure, but from unexpected direction. Rather than punishment for their unconventional arrangement, they faced what might be opportunity or disguised trap. "And if I decline this invitation?" Sigran asked, voice carefully controlled. "Magnus is not accustomed to refusal. He has ways of making displeasure felt, and we are not positioned to risk his enmity without very good reason." Tormund felt familiar protective anger, but forced rational consideration. His vow to shield his sister was being tested unexpectedly. This was not simple rejection. This was power's complex maneuvering, where refusal might have consequences extending beyond personal feelings. When does he expect an answer? "The delegation arrives in 3 days. We are expected to provide hospitality while they conduct evaluation." The word evaluation struck Sigran like physical blow. After weeks of growing confidence, of believing she had found voice and worth, she was again being reduced to commodity for assessment by strangers who saw her gifts as potentially useful tools rather than expressions of essential self. "I will not be paraded before him like prize horse," she said, voice carrying surprising steel. "If Jarl Magnus wishes to hear me sing, he may ask properly, with respect for what I choose to share." Tormund felt pride at his sister's newfound assertiveness, but recognized dangers in such stance. Magnus was not Ragnar. He was man of genuine power who would not tolerate perceived disrespect. "There may be middle path," he said carefully. "We welcome his delegation with proper hospitality, but make clear that any discussion of Sigrun's future must acknowledge her right to make own choices." "And if he disagrees?" Bjorn asked. "Then we discover whether our principles are worth their price." The next 3 days passed in preparation, whirlwind, and anxious speculation. Household staff worked to ensure Jotunfell would make best impression on important guests. While family grappled with larger implications, Sigrun threw herself into practice with desperate intensity. working on pieces, showcasing abilities while remaining true to artistic vision. She would not compromise her gift to please potential patron, but understood the performance's importance. The delegation from Nordfjord arrived with impressive ceremony, dozen mounted warriors, several advisors, and Magnus himself, whose reputation for shrewd intelligence was immediately apparent in sharp eyes and measured speech. He possessed presence that commanded respect through sheer personality force. "Jarl Bjorn," he said, dismounting with fluid grace, "I thank you for hospitality. I have traveled far to see for myself the wonders your household has produced." The words were courteous, but contained undertones suggesting this was not entirely request. Magnus was accustomed to having curiosity satisfied. Formal introductions proceeded according to custom. But Tormund noticed how Magnus's attention lingered on Sigrun, studying her with calculating intensity. This was man evaluating potential assets. "I have heard remarkable tales of your daughter's gifts," Magnus said to Bjorn, though his eyes remained on Sigrun. "Songs that move hardest hearts, melodies carrying ancestors' wisdom. Such talents are rare and should be properly treasured." "They are treasured here," Tormund interjected, voice carrying subtle warning Magnus was sharp enough to catch. "Indeed. But talent without proper scope for expression is like blade kept too long in sheath. It may lose its edge for want of use." The verbal sparring continued throughout formal dinner, with Magnus probing their situation while they presented united front. He had done considerable research, understanding not just Sigrun's gifts, but complex dynamics leading to Tormund's protective vow. As evening progressed, conversation turned to the question that had brought Magnus so far. "Lady Sigrun," he said respectfully but expectantly, "would you honor us with demonstration of gifts that have earned such widespread praise?" It was the moment they had prepared for, the test determining not just Magnus's interest, but possibly their lives' future direction. Sigrun rose gracefully, accepting guidance to hall center. Settling on her simple performance stool, the song she chose was her own composition, telling of woman who found strength in accepting her nature rather than changing to please others. It was subtle but unmistakable statement, delivered with beauty and power that softened even Magnus's calculating reserve. When final notes faded, the hall remained still before erupting in genuine appreciation. Magnus led applause, his expression showing first unguarded emotion since arrival. "Remarkable," he said with entirely sincere tone. "The tales did not exaggerate. If anything, they understated your extraordinary gift. What followed reshaped their understanding of options and obligations." Magnus was interested in bringing Sigrun to his household, but not as dependent or ornament. He envisioned her as cultural treasure, artist whose gifts would enhance his court and bring prestige. The offer was generous, position of honor, resources to develop talents, opportunities for worthy audiences. But it meant leaving Jotunfell, leaving family and protection that had sustained her through darkest moments. As negotiations continued, Tormund watched his sister's face, seeing hunger for recognition war with attachment to home and safety. The Wayfarer's map had brought them to this crossroads, and now they would discover whether the paths it revealed led to opportunity or danger. 3 days of negotiations with Magnus had left everyone exhausted, but no closer to resolution. The powerful Jarl remained courteous yet insistent, his offer growing more elaborate with each passing conversation. Gold, status, audiences worthy of Sigrun's gifts, he painted pictures of a life she had never dared imagine. Yet something in his persistence felt less like genuine appreciation and more like acquisition. It was during the final evening of his stay that old Astrid approached Sigrun with trembling hands, carrying something wrapped in faded cloth. The serving woman had been with the family since before Sigrun's birth, her loyalty absolute and her wisdom hard-earned through decades of observing the subtle currents of household politics. "Child," she whispered, unwrapping her burden to reveal an ancient pendant of carved bone and silver wire. "This belonged to your grandmother's grandmother, passed down through 7 generations of women who knew their own worth. She was called Solveig the Wise, and they said she could see truth even when others spoke lies. The healer's pendant felt warm against Sigrun's palm, its intricate carvings depicting runes of protection and wisdom. According to family lore, it had been blessed by a vulva, a seeress whose spiritual power commanded respect even from kings. The pendant was said to strengthen the inner sight of those who wore it, helping them perceive the true nature of people and situations. "Why now?" Sigrun asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Because you stand at a crossroads where the wrong choice might cost you everything you have become," Astrid replied. "And because I have watched Magnus these 3 days, seen how he looks at you. He sees treasure to be claimed, not a person to be honored." The old woman's words echoed Sigrun's own growing unease. Magnus spoke eloquently of her gifts, but always in terms of what they could do for him, for his court, for his reputation. Never had he asked what she wanted from life, what dreams she harbored beyond the recognition he offered. That night, wearing the pendant beneath her dress, Sigrun experienced something that felt like the awakening of a sense she had never possessed. During the farewell feast, she found herself perceiving layers of meaning in conversations, sensing the emotions and intentions that lay beneath polite words. When Magnus raised his cup to toast the extraordinary gifts that grace this hall, she felt the calculating coldness behind his warm smile. When he spoke of the opportunities that await in Nordfjord, she sensed his certainty that she would ultimately succumb to his persuasion. Most disturbing of all, when he mentioned the protection and guidance he could provide, she felt the possessive hunger of a collector who had decided to add a rare prize to his hoard. But it was not only Magnus who revealed himself through this new perception. Tormund's emotions came through as clearly as if he had spoken them aloud. His fierce, protective love, tangled with fear of losing her. His pride in her growing independence, warring with terror of the danger she might face beyond his reach. Her parents, too, became transparent to this strange new sight. Her father's political calculations were obvious, weighing the advantages of alliance against the cost of losing his daughter. Her mother's fears ran deeper, not just worry about Sigrun's safety, but guilt over years of seeing her daughter as a burden, rather than recognizing the remarkable woman she had become. The most startling revelation came when she turned this enhanced perception upon herself. For years, she had defined herself primarily through her limitations: the blind daughter, the unmarriageable burden, the sister who needed protection. But wearing her ancestor's pendant, she began to see herself as others saw her, a woman of rare gifts, genuine wisdom, and uncommon strength. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. If she was not the helpless creature she had believed herself to be, then she bore responsibility for her own choices and their consequences. She could not hide behind her disability or depend on others to determine her fate. As the evening progressed, Magnus made his final, most persuasive offer. Speaking directly to her rather than through her father, he painted a vision of artistic fulfillment that seemed to address every longing she had ever felt. "In Nordfjord, you would be honored as a treasure of our people," he said, his voice warm with apparent sincerity. "The finest musicians would learn from you, the greatest skalds would collaborate with you, and your songs would be preserved for generations. You would never again face the ignorance of those who cannot see past surface appearances." It was everything she thought she wanted: recognition, respect, artistic community, freedom from the narrow confines of her current life. Yet the pendant's influence allowed her to perceive the chains hidden within the offer, the subtle ways in which Magnus's honor would become another form of captivity. "And what of my family?" she asked. "What of the bonds that have sustained me through the darkest times?" "Family visits can be arranged," Magnus replied smoothly, though his slight hesitation revealed how little such considerations mattered to him. "But truly, great artists must sometimes make sacrifices for their art. Your gifts are too precious to be confined to this small corner of the world." The words were reasonable, even compelling, but Sigrun felt the dismissive arrogance beneath them. Magnus saw her family as obstacles to be managed, her emotional needs as weaknesses to be overcome. In his vision, she would be isolated from everything that had shaped her, dependent entirely on his goodwill for her position and security. For the first time since her childhood, Sigrun experienced a moment of perfect clarity about her own nature and desires. She possessed remarkable gifts, but those gifts had grown from the soil of her particular struggles, watered by the love of those who had seen her worth when the world did not. To transplant herself into Magnus's carefully controlled environment might preserve her talents, but it would sever the roots that made those talents meaningful. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a certainty that surprised everyone in the hall, including herself. "I'm honored by your offer, Jarl Magnus, and I recognize the opportunities you describe. But my gifts were shaped by this place, these people, these particular struggles and joys. To remove them from that context would be like trying to transplant an ancient tree. The form might survive, but the essence would be lost." Magnus's face darkened with the first genuine emotion he had shown since his arrival, anger at being refused by someone he considered his inferior. "You would choose this provincial isolation over the recognition and honor I offer?" "I choose growth over recognition, authenticity over honor," she replied. "And I choose to trust in the wisdom of those who have loved me at my worst, rather than those who desire me at my best." The silence that followed was profound. Magnus had been refused politely but definitively by someone who was supposed to be grateful for his attention. His companions shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the unprecedented nature of the situation. Tormund watched his sister with amazement and pride, seeing in her bearing the transformation he had hoped for, but hardly dared expect. This was not the frightened young woman who had endured Ragnar's mockery. This was someone who knew her own worth and was prepared to defend it. The negotiations concluded with formal courtesy but underlying tension. Magnus would return to Nordfjord without his prize, and the word would spread that a blind girl from a minor settlement had refused the most powerful jarl in the north. The political implications were significant, but for the first time, Sigrun found that she cared less about those implications than about maintaining her integrity. As Magnus's delegation departed the next morning, Sigrun stood in the garden beside her singing stone, the ancient pendant warm against her chest. She had chosen her path, but she understood that the choice would bring challenges she could not yet foresee. The pendant had shown her truth, but it had also shown her that some truths were dangerous to know. The revelation came 3 days after Magnus's departure, delivered by the most unlikely messenger, a bent, ancient woman who appeared at Jotunfell's gates as if materialized from the morning mist itself. She called herself Ragnhild the Farseer, and claimed to have traveled from the sacred grove of Uppsala, carrying knowledge that would change everything they thought they understood about Sigrun's nature and destiny. Jarl Bjorn received her with the cautious respect due to one whose appearance and bearing suggested deep spiritual authority. She was impossibly old, her hair white as winter snow, her face marked by decades of exposure to harsh northern winds. But her eyes burned with an intelligence that seemed to pierce through pretense and illusion to the essential truths beneath. "I come because the gods have shown me visions that cannot be ignored," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to being obeyed. "Your daughter is not what you believe her to be. Her blindness is not curse or accident. It is the mark of one chosen to see beyond the physical world into the realm of deeper truth." The words fell into the great hall like stones cast into still water, creating ripples of confusion and wonder. Sigrun felt her heart racing beneath the healer's pendant, which seemed to grow warm against her skin as if responding to the vulva's presence. "Explain yourself, wise woman," Bjorn said carefully. "What do you mean by chosen?" Ragnhild reached into her travel-worn pouch and withdrew a scroll, unlike any they had seen, not mere parchment, but what appeared to be bark from the world tree itself, covered in runes that seemed to shift and dance in the firelight. The Truth Scroll, she called it, inscribed with prophecy that had waited generations for fulfillment. 23 years ago, she began, her voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of prophecy. The night your daughter was born beneath the blood moon, every Velva in the northern lands received the same vision. A child would be born who would bridge the world of sight and the world of spirit, whose blindness would become perfect vision, whose weakness would become unmatched strength. She held up the scroll, and though Sigran could not see the runes, she felt their power like heat from a forge fire. The prophecy speaks of one who will sing the songs that wake the sleeping earth, whose voice will carry the wisdom of the ancestors to future generations. But more than this, she will become the conduit through which the old ways are preserved and the new ways are guided. Tormund felt the familiar surge of protective skepticism. Too often he had seen his sister's hopes raised by those who promised understanding, only to have them dashed by hidden cruelties or selfish motives. And what proof do you offer of these grand claims? The Velva smiled, and in that expression lay depths of knowledge that seemed older than the mountains themselves. The proof lies in what she has already become, young giant. Has she not memorized every song, every story, every piece of wisdom that has ever reached her ears? Can she not perceive emotions and intentions that remain hidden from those who rely only on physical sight? Does her voice not move hearts in ways that go beyond mere musical skill? As she spoke, each word seemed to illuminate aspects of Sigran's nature that had been overlooked or misunderstood. Her extraordinary memory, which they had attributed to compensation for her blindness, was revealed as the gift of one chosen to preserve cultural wisdom. Her uncanny ability to read people's emotions, enhanced by the healer's pendant but present long before, was shown to be the mark of spiritual sight that transcended physical limitations. The blood moon that marked her birth was not an omen of misfortune, Ragnhild continued, but a sign of transformation. She was born to stand between worlds, the seen and unseen, the heard and unheard, the remembered and forgotten. Every rejection she has endured, every moment of isolation and pain, has been preparation for the role she was born to fulfill. Sigran felt tears streaming down her face as the Velva's words reframed her entire existence. The disabilities that had seemed like cruel cosmic jokes were revealed as necessary qualifications for a destiny she had never imagined. The social isolation that had felt like punishment was shown to be protection, keeping her pure of spirit and connected to deeper truths that worldly success might have obscured. But why reveal this now? Lady Ragnhild asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why have we lived all these years believing our daughter cursed when she was truly blessed? Because she needed to experience rejection to understand the pain of the overlooked and dismissed, the Velva replied. She needed to know weakness to appreciate true strength, needed to face limitations to transcend them. Most importantly, she needed to choose her own path freely, without the burden of knowing her destiny. Only through genuine choice could she become who she was meant to be. The truth of this resonated through every fiber of Sigran's being. Had she known from childhood that she was destined for spiritual greatness, she might have developed pride or expectations that would have corrupted her gifts. Instead, growing up believing herself limited had fostered humility, empathy, and the deep understanding of human suffering that made her song so powerful. What comes next? Tormund asked, though part of him feared the answer. The protective role that had given his life meaning was being redefined by forces beyond his understanding or control. That depends on her, Ragnhild said, turning her unseeing but penetrating gaze towards Sigran. The prophecy speaks of choice, not compulsion. She can continue as she has, using her gifts to bring joy and wisdom to this household and community. There would be honor in such a life, and the gods would be pleased. She paused, allowing the weight of possibility to settle over them. Or she can embrace the fullness of her calling and become what the northern lands need most, a bridge between the dying old ways and the uncertain future. Such a path would demand sacrifices that would test even her remarkable spirit. Sigran felt the truth scroll's power resonating through her bones. awakening something that had always been present but never acknowledged. She understood now why Erik Thorson had been drawn to their settlement, why Magnus had travelled so far to claim her gifts, why rumours of her abilities had spread across the northern lands. She was not simply a talented singer who happened to be blind. She was a conduit for forces larger than individual ambition or artistic achievement. "Show me," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was requesting. "Show me what the prophecy truly means." The Völva nodded and began to recite from the truth scroll, her voice taking on otherworldly resonance that seemed to come from the earth itself. The words painted visions of a future where the old gods spoke through human voices, where ancient wisdom guided new discoveries, where the scattered threads of northern culture were woven together by songs that transcended tribal boundaries. In this future, Sigrun was not confined to any single settlement or court, but travelled freely among all the northern peoples, carrying messages between communities, preserving stories that might otherwise be lost, and helping to heal the divisions that weakened them against outside threats. Her blindness became perfect spiritual sight, her physical weakness transformed into unshakable inner strength, but the prophecy also spoke of trials that would test her resolve, of enemies who would seek to use or destroy her gifts, of choices that would determine not just her own fate, but the future of her entire people. The path of destiny was not easier than the path of ordinary life. It was infinitely more demanding. When the Völva finished speaking, the whole remained silent for a long moment. Everyone present understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment when the veil between ordinary existence and cosmic purpose had been lifted. "I need time to consider this," Sigrun said finally, though she could feel the truth of the prophecy singing in her blood like wine. "Such knowledge changes everything." "Time you shall have," Ragnhild agreed, "but not too much time. The northern lands face challenges that will soon require the gifts you possess. The old ways are dying, new threats are rising from the south, and the bonds between communities grow weaker with each passing season. Whether you choose to answer your calling or not, these forces will not wait for your decision." As the ancient Völva departed the next morning, dissolving back into the mist from which she had emerged, Sigrun sat beside her singing stone with the truth scroll in her lap. The runes she could not see seemed to pulse with inner light, and for the first time in her life, she began to understand that her blindness was not an obstacle to sight, but a different kind of vision altogether. The girl who had been born cursed was actually the woman who had been born blessed. And now she had to decide what to do with that blessing. The Truth Scroll's revelations had transformed Jotunfell into a place of profound contemplation and careful preparation. For 7 days, Sigrun had wrestled with the magnitude of her destiny, seeking guidance in prayer and meditation while her family grappled with their own understanding of what the prophecy meant for all of them. It was on the 8th morning that a new complication arrived in the form of Erik Thorson, returning with urgent news that would force all theoretical considerations into immediate, practical reality. His face bore the marks of hard travel and harder tidings, and his usually cheerful demeanor had been replaced by grim determination. "The southern kingdoms are mobilizing," he announced without preamble as soon as he had been welcomed into the hall. Christian armies march northward, led by missionaries who speak of converting or conquering the heathen peoples. They bring not just swords, but scribes who seek to replace our oral traditions with written doctrine, our ancient songs with foreign hymns. The news struck the assembled family like a physical blow. They had heard rumors of southern expansion, whispers of a new religion that demanded exclusive devotion and condemned the old ways as demonic delusion. But the threat had always seemed distant, a problem for future generations to address. "How much time do we have?" Jarl Bjorn asked, his mind already calculating defensive preparations and alliance possibilities. "Months, perhaps a year before they reach the northern settlements," Erik replied. "But their influence spreads faster than their armies. Some Jarls have already begun converting their people, seeing political advantage in aligning with the southern powers. The cultural bonds that have held our people together for centuries are beginning to fray. As Eric spoke, Sigrun felt the Truth Scroll's presence like a weight against her chest, where she now wore it in a leather pouch beside the healer's pendant. The ancient prophecy had spoken of her role as a bridge between worlds, a preserver of wisdom in times of great change. She was beginning to understand that the choice facing her was not abstract destiny, but immediate necessity. Tormund saw the recognition dawning in his sister's expression and felt his protective instincts surge with renewed intensity. The comfortable role of shielding her from local prejudices was being replaced by something far more complex and dangerous, the need to help her navigate forces that could reshape the entire northern world. There is more, Eric continued, his voice dropping to convey information of particular sensitivity. Word of the Völva's visit has spread. Some see it as vindication of the old ways, proof that the gods still speak to those who will listen. Others denounce it as precisely the kind of superstition that must be abandoned if our people are to survive in the changing world. Lady Ragnhild pressed a hand to her throat, understanding immediately what this meant for her daughter's safety. She has become a symbol. Yes, Eric confirmed grimly, and symbols are dangerous things to be. There are those who would use her as a rallying point for resistance against southern influence, and others who would see her eliminated as an obstacle to necessary change. Either path leads to danger. The weight of these implications settled over the hall like a shroud. Sigrun's spiritual calling was no longer a matter of personal choice, but a political reality that would affect the lives of countless people, whether she embraced it or not. Her gifts, her story, her very existence had become factors in a struggle larger than any individual preference. It was then that the most unexpected visitor of all made his presence known, a young man who had been waiting quietly in the shadows of the hall, listening to their conversation with the intense focus of one whose life depended on understanding every nuance. When he stepped forward into the firelight, Sigrun felt her heart stop. He was not exceptionally tall or broad, but he moved with the fluid grace of one trained in both combat and diplomacy. His clothes were well-made but travel-worn, his weapons of good quality but showing use. Most remarkably, when he looked at Sigrun, his eyes held no pity, no calculation, no uncomfortable shifting away, only genuine recognition of who she was rather than what she lacked. "My name is Finn Eriksson," he said, offering a formal bow to Jarl Bjorn before addressing Sigrun directly. "I am a skald from the western settlements, and I have traveled far to seek the woman whose songs are said to carry the voices of the ancestors themselves." Unlike Magnus's calculating assessment or Ragnar's dismissive evaluation, Finn's attention felt like recognition between equals. He had come not to claim her gifts for his own purposes, but to honor them for their own sake. "I bring word from the Circle of Voices," he continued. "The autumn gathering at Kaupang has been moved to the sacred grove at Gamla Uppsala, and its purpose transformed from mere celebration to urgent preservation. We seek to record and safeguard as much of the old wisdom as possible before it can be lost to the changes sweeping across our lands." He paused, and in that moment, Sigrun felt the choice stones, two ancient runes that had materialized in her hands as if placed there by invisible forces. One was carved with symbols representing safety and continuity, the other with signs of journey and transformation. The Völva had spoken of such tokens, artifacts that appeared when destiny required a clear decision. "Lady Sigrun," Finn said, his voice carrying a respect that warmed her more than any amount of gold or status could have. "Your presence at this gathering would not merely honor us. It would help ensure that the wisdom of our people survives whatever trials lie ahead. But I come not to compel or persuade, only to offer you the choice that is rightfully yours." The sincerity in his tone, so different from Magnus's manipulative eloquence, reached something deep within her. Here was someone who understood that her gifts were not possessions to be claimed, but expressions of her essential self to be honored and protected. Tormund watched this exchange with complex emotions. He could see his sister responding to Finn's respectful approach, could sense her growing interest in the possibility he represented. But he could also see the dangers inherent in such a path, the physical risks of travel, the political complications of aligning with one faction over another, the emotional vulnerability of trusting her safety to relative strangers. "And what of her safety?" he asked bluntly. "You speak of preserving wisdom, but who preserves the wise woman herself when forces gather that would use or destroy her?" Finn met his gaze steadily, understanding that this question came from genuine love rather than mere protectiveness. "I cannot promise safety. These are not safe times for any of us. But I can promise that she would be valued not as a tool or trophy, but as a partner in work that matters. And I can promise that those who would protect her would do so from conviction rather than obligation." The subtle distinction struck both siblings with unexpected force. Tormund's protection, however genuine, had grown from family duty and brotherly love. But protection chosen freely by those who recognized her worth would be fundamentally different, neither possessive nor limiting, but enabling. As the evening progressed, the conversation ranged across all the implications of the choice before them. Eric provided detailed intelligence about the southern threat and the northern response. Finn described the work being done to preserve cultural knowledge and the crucial role Sigrun could play in that effort. Jarl Bjorn and Lady Ragnhild struggled with their own fears about releasing their daughter into a dangerous world, but it was Sigrun herself who gradually emerged as the central figure in these discussions, no longer the vulnerable dependent whose fate would be decided by others, but the woman whose choice would shape not only her own destiny, but the cultural future of her people. The choice stones grew warm in her hands as the night deepened, and she understood that the moment of decision was approaching. She could choose safety, remaining at Jotunfell, using her gifts to bring joy and wisdom to her family and community, living a good life within familiar boundaries. Or she could choose purpose, accepting the risks and responsibilities of her prophesied role, venturing into uncertainty for the sake of preserving what mattered most to her people. As dawn approached, Sigrun knew that the comfortable life of the protected daughter was ending, one way or another. The only question was whether she would step into uncertainty as a willing participant in her own destiny, or be swept along by forces beyond her control. The choice stones pulsed with ancient power, waiting for her decision. And in that waiting, she felt the weight not just of personal preference, but of cultural preservation, spiritual calling, and the countless lives that would be affected by whatever path she chose. The moment of choosing had arrived, and there could be no turning back from whatever decision she made. The moment of decision came with the rising sun, its pale light streaming through the great hall's windows as Sigrun stood before her assembled family. The choice stones warm in her palms, and the weight of destiny heavy on her shoulders. "I choose the stones of journey and transformation," she announced, holding up the carved rune that pulsed with inner fire. "I choose to honor the calling that was placed upon me before birth, to serve as bridge between the old ways and whatever future awaits our people." The words fell into silence like drops of molten metal. Tormund felt his heart clench with pride and terror, while their parents struggled to find adequate words. But it was the ceremony that followed, which would be remembered long after emotions had faded. Sigrun had requested something unprecedented, a formal ritual of release that would free her brother from his protective vow while honoring the love that had inspired it. "Bring forth the bonding blade," she said, her voice carrying spiritual authority. "Let what was bound in protection be transformed in blessing." The ceremonial knife was ancient, its blade forged from star metal and its handle carved with runes of power. Traditionally used in marriage ceremonies and blood brotherhood rituals, it had never been employed for the kind of release Sigrun was requesting. Tormund took the blade with trembling hands. Understanding this moment, marked the end of one phase of their relationship and the beginning of another. He had sworn to be her shield, but she was asking him to trust that she no longer needed shielding. "Brother," she said gently but firmly, "you have been my champion when I could not champion myself. My voice when I had not found my own, my strength when I believed myself weak. But the woman I have become no longer needs protection from the world. She needs freedom to engage with it fully." She held out her hand, palm up, in the ancient gesture of willing sacrifice. "I ask you to cut the bonds of guardianship that have tied us together, not in rejection of your love, but in transformation of it. Be no longer my protector, but my witness. No longer my champion, but my supporter." The blade caught morning light as Tormund raised it, hesitating, overwhelmed by what she was asking. To release her meant accepting that she would face dangers he could not prevent, make choices he could not influence, walk paths he could not share. But as he looked into her face, no longer the frightened girl who had needed his defense, but the woman who had found her own courage, he understood that holding on to his protective role would be not love, but selfishness. The blade descended in a swift, clean stroke, cutting through the leather cord that bound the choice stones together. As the binding parted, both siblings felt something shift in their relationship's fundamental nature, not weakening, but transforming from dependence to partnership. "I release you from the burden of my safety," Sigrun said formally, "and accept responsibility for my own choices and their consequences." "I release you to your destiny," Tormund replied, voice thick with emotion, "and pledge my support rather than my guardianship, my trust rather than my protection." The ceremony was witnessed by Eric and Finn, as well as their parents, each understanding they had observed something unprecedented, the conscious transformation of a bond that had defined both siblings' identities. But even as one relationship was being redefined, another was beginning to take shape. Throughout the ceremony, Finn had watched with attention that went beyond mere interest in cultural preservation. When Sigran spoke of needing foundation rather than shield, his eyes flickered with understanding. In the hours that followed, as preparations began for the journey to Gamla Uppsala, Finn's interest in Sigrun became clear as extending beyond her role as wisdom vessel. He sought conversations ranging from technical song preservation to personal reflections on destiny and choice. Unlike previous suitors, Finn showed no discomfort with her blindness, no awkwardness about her limitations. Instead, he seemed fascinated by the different ways she perceived the world. "You hear things others miss," he said during one garden walk, voice carrying wonder rather than pity. "When you listen to people speak, you catch emotions beneath their words, truths they're trying to hide or share. It's like having access to an entirely different layer of reality. Is that why you seek my company?" Sigran asked with testing directness. "Because I am curious and unusual? I seek your company," Finn replied with matching honesty. "Because when I am with you, I feel like I'm becoming more than I was before. Your questions make me think more deeply. Your insights challenge my assumptions. Your strength inspires courage. You are not a curiosity to be studied, but a person whose presence enriches everyone around her." The words were simple, but carried sincerity that reached past all defenses. Here was recognition not of her gifts as tools, but of her worth as a person. Here was someone who saw her blindness not as limitation to overcome, but as one aspect of a compelling whole. As departure approached, Sigrun found herself facing not just the end of one life and beginning of another, but the possibility that she might not make that journey alone. Finn had made no formal declaration, but his attention suggested feelings beyond professional collaboration. The night before departure, she sat once more beside her singing stone. Tomorrow she would leave this garden, this home, this life of familiar safety, and venture into a world promising both danger and destiny. But tonight, she was no longer the frightened girl who had endured mockery. She was Sigrun Bjornsdottir, bearer of prophecy, keeper of wisdom, and perhaps, though she hardly dared think it, a woman capable of inspiring love in someone worthy of her affection. The transformation was complete. All that remained was to see where her new path would lead. The morning of departure dawned clear and bright, as if the gods themselves had blessed Sigrun's decision to embrace her destiny. She stood in Jotunfel's courtyard, no longer the uncertain girl who had once cowered from suitors' mockery, but a woman transformed by acceptance of her true calling. The dawn crown, though invisible to her eyes, seemed to rest upon her head like a circlet of pure light, marking her transformation from protected daughter to autonomous bearer of ancient wisdom. Those who witnessed her that morning would later speak of how she radiated quiet authority that commanded respect without demanding it. Her traveling gear was simple but carefully chosen. Warm clothes suited to northern journey, a small harp Tormund had crafted for her use, and the leather pouch containing both truth scroll and healer's pendant. Most importantly, she carried herself with dignity of one who had found her place in destiny's great pattern. Finn stood beside the horses, his preparations complete, watching her final farewells with understanding rather than impatience. He had made clear that he would travel at her pace, accommodate her needs, ensure the journey to Gamla Uppsala honored her comfort as well as their mission's urgency. "Sister," Tormund said, approaching for their final private conversation, "I find myself struggling with emotions I cannot properly name. Pride in who you have become, fear for dangers you will face, joy that you have found your path, sorrow that it leads away from us. All those feelings are proper," she replied, reaching up to touch his face in the gesture that had always been their most intimate communication. "But remember that I carry you with me, not as burden, but as blessing. The strength you taught me, the courage you showed me, the love you gave me, these become part of who I am as I step into this new life." Their parents joined them for final blessing, Jarlbjorn's weathered hands steady as he placed them on his daughter's shoulders. "You go with our love and faith in your wisdom. May the gods guide your path and ancestors strengthen your voice." Lady Ragnhild's embrace carried years of worry transformed into pride. "I have spent too many nights fearing for your future. Now I understand that the future itself depends partly on your courage. Go well, my remarkable daughter." But it was the community's response that surprised them all. As Sigrun and Finn prepared to ride through Jotunfel's gates, they found their path lined with people who had come to offer blessings and witness her departure. Servants and warriors, craftsmen and farmers, children and elders, all stood in respectful silence as she passed. An old woman stepped forward, pressing a small carved bird into Sigrun's hands. "For good fortune on your journey." A young warrior offered blessing for protection. A child sang a fragment of one of Sigrun's own compositions, melody sweet and clear in morning air. These were the people she was leaving behind, but also the people she was serving by accepting her calling. Their songs, their stories, their ways of understanding the world, all of this she would help preserve and pass to future generations. As they rode beyond familiar boundaries of her childhood home, Sigrun felt no regret, only anticipation. The path ahead was uncertain, perhaps dangerous, certainly challenging. But for the first time in her life, she was walking it as herself, not as someone's burden or responsibility, but as Sigrun Bjornsdottir, chosen of the gods and keeper of cultural memory. The journey to Gamla Uppsala would take them through territories she had never seen, past settlements where her reputation had already spread. Some would welcome them as honored guests, others might view them with suspicion or hostility. The southern threat grew stronger with each passing day, and old ways were under increasing pressure from those who saw them as obstacles to survival. But Sigrun rode toward these challenges with steady heart. She had accepted not just the gifts of prophecy, but responsibilities that came with them. She would help preserve what could be saved, adapt what needed changing, and bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and future necessity. Finn rode beside her, matching his pace to hers and offering conversation when she wanted it, comfortable silence when she preferred contemplation. His presence was neither intrusive nor absent, but perfectly calibrated to her needs and preferences. In him, she sensed possibility of partnership that honored both their individual strengths and shared commitment to their people's cultural survival. "Tell me about the circle of voices," she said as they crested a hill, offering their last view of Jotunfell's familiar outline. "What will be expected of me when we arrive?" "Nothing that you are not ready to give," Finn replied. "Your role will be what you choose to make it. Some members focus on preserving traditional songs exactly as passed down. Others work to create new compositions, carrying old wisdom into contemporary forms. Still others serve as teachers, helping younger voices develop gifts. And what do you see as my contribution?" Finn was quiet, considering his words carefully. "I see you as someone who can do all these things, but more. Someone who can help us understand how to honor the past while embracing necessary change. Your blindness has taught you to perceive truths that escape those who rely only on physical sight. Your struggles have given you empathy for others who face rejection. Your transformation shows that apparent limitations can become sources of unprecedented strength." As afternoon stretched toward evening, they stopped to rest beside a clear stream that sang its own melody over smooth stones. While Finn tended horses, Sigrun practiced with her traveling harp, working through pieces she might share at their destination. The music flowing from her fingers was different from anything she had created before. More confident, complex, willing to explore difficult harmonies and challenging themes. It was music of someone who had found her voice and was no longer afraid to use it fully. As they prepared to sleep under stars, Sigrun reflected on how much had changed since that terrible night when Ragnar had mocked her. Then she had been victim of circumstances beyond her control. Now she was active participant in shaping not just her own destiny, but her people's cultural future. The dawn crown of her transformation was invisible but real, marking her passage from one phase of existence to another. She had become the woman the prophecy had foretold, not despite her blindness and struggles, but because of them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, opportunities, tests of resolve and wisdom. But tonight, under the vast northern sky with the stream's gentle music and purpose warming her heart, Sigran knew she had finally found her place in existence's great pattern. She was exactly who she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. 1 year later, the great hall of Jotunfell buzzed with anticipation as visitors from across the northern lands gathered for unprecedented celebration. Word had spread of Sigrun's remarkable journey and cultural preservation work she had accomplished with the Circle of Voices, drawing scholars, singers, and storytellers from settlements that had never before communicated. The memory tapestry hung prominently on the eastern wall, a magnificent weaving Sigran had created during winter months at Gamla Uppsala, its intricate patterns telling the story of her transformation through symbols and colors that spoke to both sighted and blind. Each thread represented a moment in her journey, from dark blues of early struggles to golden threads depicting her acceptance of destiny, culminating in silver patterns showing her role as bridge between old ways and new understanding. Tormund stood before the tapestry, running his massive fingers gently over its textured surface as Sigran had taught him, reading the story through touch. His role had evolved exactly as she had predicted, no longer protector but supporter, no longer shield but foundation. "She has woven our family's story into the larger pattern," he said to their parents. "But more than that, she has shown how individual struggles can become universal wisdom." Jarl Bjorn nodded, his weathered face reflecting complex emotions of a father who had watched his daughter transform from perceived burden to celebrated treasure. "I confess, I did not understand the god's purpose when she was born different. Now I see that difference was not curse but calling, not limitation but preparation." Lady Ragnhild wiped tears as she studied the tapestry's most intricate section, the part depicting Sigrun's work with refugee families fleeing southern Christian expansion. Through her songs and stories, she had helped preserve their cultural knowledge while assisting integration into northern communities. The celebration began at sunset, with representatives from dozens of settlements gathering in the torchlit hall. Eric Thorson served as master of ceremonies, his voice carrying easily as he introduced speakers and performers who had come to honor Sigrun's contributions. But it was Finn who drew greatest attention as he rose to address the assembly. Over the past year, he had emerged not just as Sigrun's collaborator in cultural preservation, but as her partner in the deepest sense. Their courtship had been conducted through shared purpose and mutual respect, growing into love that honored both their individual gifts and common calling. Friends and kinfolk, he began, voice warm with genuine emotion. We gather tonight not merely to celebrate one woman's remarkable journey, but to recognize the truth she has taught us all, that strength comes in forms we do not always recognize, that wisdom often speaks through voices we have been taught to ignore, and that our people's future depends on our ability to see worth where others see only limitation. He gestured toward the memory tapestry, its patterns seeming to dance in flickering torchlight. Sigrun Bjornsdottir has shown us that blindness can become perfect sight when it perceives truths that lie beyond surface appearances. Her struggles with rejection and isolation prepared her to understand the pain of all who are dismissed. Her apparent weakness became unshakable strength when she learned to trust in her own worth. The hall remained silent, every person understanding they were witnessing something unprecedented. Formal recognition of a disabled woman as cultural hero, spiritual leader, and preserver of their people's most precious heritage. Sigrun herself sat quietly beside the memory tapestry, hands folded, the truth scroll and healer's pendant resting against her heart. She had learned to be comfortable with such attention, understanding it not as personal aggrandizement, but as recognition of larger forces she served. When Finn finished his remarks, he turned to her with expression of such tender respect that even cynical observers felt their hearts stirred. "Lady Sigrun," he said, offering his hand, "would you honor us by sharing the song that has become the anthem of our preservation efforts?" She rose gracefully, accepting his assistance from partnership that had grown between them. The piece she had chosen was one of her own compositions, complex work that wove together traditional melodies from various northern settlements, creating harmony from diversity while honoring each contribution's unique voice. As her clear voice filled the hall, accompanied by the traveling harp that had become her constant companion, the assembled crowd experienced something approaching the sacred. The song spoke of change without loss of identity, of adaptation without abandonment of core values, of hope in the face of uncertainty. When final notes faded, the silence that followed was not empty but full, pregnant with possibility, rich with recognition, warm with appreciation that transforms both giver and receiver. As evening progressed, celebration evolved into something more significant than mere festivity. Representatives from different settlements began discussing cooperative efforts to preserve and share cultural knowledge. Young singers sought instruction in Sigrun's techniques for weaving old wisdom into new forms. The memory tapestry had become more than artistic achievement. It was roadmap for cultural survival, demonstration that their people could adapt to changing circumstances without losing essential identity. Late in the evening, as formal ceremonies gave way to intimate conversations, Sigrun found herself beside her old singing stone in the garden. The familiar granite boulder had been decorated with flowers and candles, transforming her private place of practice into shrine of sorts. Finn joined her there, as she had known he would. Their relationship had developed comfortable rhythms of true partnership, each understanding the other's needs, each supporting the other's growth. "Are you content with what you have accomplished?" he asked, settling beside her on the stone that had witnessed her transformation. "Content is too small a word," she replied thoughtfully. "I'm fulfilled in ways I never imagined possible, not because of recognition or praise, but because I finally understand my place in existence's great pattern. I'm exactly who I was meant to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do." She paused, face turning toward the star-filled sky she could not see, but whose vastness she could feel. The girl who was born blind and weak has become a woman who helps others see truths they might otherwise miss. The sister who was protected has become a protector of cultural wisdom. The daughter who was rejected has become a bridge between worlds, and the woman who thought herself unworthy of love, Finn asked gently, has learned that love, like strength, comes in forms we do not always expect, she replied, reaching for his hand. You saw worth in me when I could not see it in myself. You offered partnership when I had known only protection or dismissal. As dawn approached and celebration finally wound down, Sigrun remained in her garden, surrounded by artifacts that had marked her journey, the memory tapestry visible through hall windows, the truth scroll and healer's pendant warm against her chest, the singing stone solid beneath her. The sun rose over Jotunfell as it had on the morning she was born, but the girl who had entered the world beneath ominous blood moon had become woman who brought light wherever she traveled. Her blindness remained, physical limitations unchanged, but she had discovered that true sight comes from within, and real strength grows from accepting rather than fighting one's essential nature. Sigrun Bjornsdottir, once the blind daughter whom no one wanted to marry, had become the woman whose voice would echo through ages, whose story would inspire countless others to see strength in apparent weakness, beauty in perceived flaws, and possibility in places where others saw only limitation. The memory tapestry would outlast them all, its threads preserving not just her individual journey, but the eternal truth she had embodied, that every person possesses unique gifts, that every struggle has purpose, and that love sees most clearly when it looks beyond surface to the soul beneath.